Hello, everyone. I'm going to start sharing my slides here in just a second, but I'm very glad that you're here for this. Really, I hope it's a conversation, a thought-provoking set of ideas regarding what I'm really observing on the higher ed landscape in regard to AI these days, and maybe conversations that we do need to be having. I mean, this particular session I've entitled "Call to Action." What conversations should we be having now about AI and the future of the professoriate? So I do believe that we are at a moment where there's yet another task on our um, list of things to do, another sort of unfunded mandate, another thing that should be on our agenda for the coming weeks that we need to be a part of. So a little bit about me first. I'm Eddie Watson. I'm the Vice President for Digital Innovation at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. I'm probably maybe these days most well known for a book called Teaching with AI, a practical guide to a new era of human learning that came out about 18 months ago. We have a brand new edition of the book, a second edition that just came out. So that's something to look forward to if you'd like to learn sort of more about my thoughts on the broader notion of teaching with AI. But I do want to talk about what I'm seeing on the landscape and what the implications are for all of us who teach. But before I jump into that, I'd first like to note that this webinar is sponsored by Alt Liberal Arts. Alt Liberal Arts is a global education initiative concerned with freedom to learn, civic engagement, and advancement of the liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Global Higher Education Alliance for the 21st Century, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures and courses for which you can register at altliberalarts.org. These lectures would not be possible without the support from the Open Society Foundation. So I'm very grateful for their support and invitation to have this conversation with you today. And I do see this as an opportunity for conversation. I mean, I've got slides to share and things to say, but you should find that if you move your mouse about on the screen a little bit, you should see a Q&A button that you could then post questions to me. So I'm going to open up my Q&A window right now and try to keep an eye on that as we go forward. But I'm definitely saving time at the end. We have, I think, 75 minutes set aside here. But before we get to the top of the coming hour, I'll stop. I'll review the Q&A and certainly engage in conversation. So definitely, post questions there. Again, I'm going to try to keep my eye on it, and we'll see how that goes with me keeping up with that. But certainly, there'll be time at the end for me to respond to the questions that you might have. Okay, a lot just said. So, how am I going to approach this conversation? I guess I thought maybe the best path forward would be for me to share what I'm seeing regarding a variety of different tensions that are coming to play on higher education and some decisions that higher education writ large is somewhat compelled to make. But then, what are the actual ramifications of some of those decisions on those of us who teach? And then, what are the possible next steps that we should be thinking about to make sure that we have agency and voice as some of these decisions are being made? So, I'm going to kind of start at the 1,000 foot level, if you will, sort of looking at maybe some global issues and then drill down to higher ed. And then let's start talking about specific classrooms and our colleagues and things like that. So it may not feel like it at the very beginning, but I promise I'm going to get there. So to begin, I guess I just wanted to sort of like bring in the conversation regarding what we know about how I guess what I believe regarding how AI is changing things within higher education, but within the world writ large. And I'm often asked, like, how did I come to start being interested in AI and writing about AI? And I mean, I was on campuses for 20 years. I was the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Georgia before joining AACNU. So very much interested in the teaching and learning enterprise, as you might imagine, and teaching and learning in general. So that really has always kept me interested in anything that's going to impact the quality of instruction in higher education. But how I really came to AI initially was through my youngest son, Carter. He came home from college in December of 2022. And it's emblazoned in my memory. He came in the front door and dropped his laundry and said hello to everyone. And then he pointed at me and he said, "Hey, Dad, have you seen ChatGPT yet?" And I said, Chat GP, the AI thing? No, I haven't seen it yet. No. And he says, Oh, Dad, this is going to change your life. I should say, Carter brings me lots of good ideas. He always says, This is going to change your life. It almost never changes my life. A good example of that is he took me to the Apple store, wanted me to try out the Apple Vision Pro goggles. This is a photo from that experience. He said, Dad, these are going to change your life. They were kind of cool, but they're 87 pounds on your head. You got to type in the air in front of you. I'll have some new form of carpal tunnel. No, it wasn't going to change my life. But he said AI was going to change my life. So he took me to the kitchen and he opened up his laptop and pulled up a web browser. And he said, So, Dad, what do you ask your students? And I said, What do I ask my students? I said, you mean like an assignment? And he said, Yeah, like what's one of your favorite assignments? And so I thought, I kind of like this. My son's taking an interest in my work. So I was sort of describing an assignment, and he was typing away as I was describing it. And then he turned the laptop toward me when I finished talking, and he said, Does this kind of capture your assignment? And I read it, and I said, That's pretty much it. And then he hit return. And it's now in family lore that the next words out of my mouth were, Oh no, because I instantly saw the academic integrity challenges this was going to bring forth to higher education. But then I also thought, wow, this is really going to impact me. Like I have to maybe rethink the way that I'm teaching my courses, what assignments I might use, what my assessments might look like. So, I do think that he's right that it is changing the really a lot of different aspects of society. So, as I mentioned, we do have a second edition of the book that's come out, and it's got sort of like the latest, my latest thoughts, my co-author's latest thoughts regarding teaching with AI and AI's impact on higher education. But, ultimately, my co-author and I, we believe that AI is changing a number of different things. AI is changing, we think, the world of work, and there's going to be a lot of information I'm going to share regarding how that is occurring. But I would go further to say that AI is changing the way that we're going to be thinking, the way that we engage in problem solving. We're already hearing notions and concepts such as cognitive offloading, where there's certain kinds of work that we might do, or even certain kinds of thinking or learning that we might do, or there's others that we might allow AI to do, and then that might benefit us in enabling us to do different kinds of thought or different kinds of problem solving. So I think we're all discovering that there's this shift. I think I saw an article just yesterday that there was an estimation that more than 90% of all jobs globally will be impacted by AI. That there'll be some expectation that we'll be engaging with AI in one way or another, big or small, in our lives and careers. I think AI is also changing the definition of the word average. I mean, if we do have assignments that we might allow students to use AI, and if AI does, let's say, just average work, is a C still a C? So very much in the concept of our syllabi, context of our syllabi. Maybe the old C is a new F, and then the old A is the new C, and then we have a new vision of what an AI human collaboration, the quality of that work, what might that look like? So, that's another shift that I think that's taking place, and that AI is also changing creativity. So these are threads that I'll be talking about as we kind of go forward, but I want to spend a little bit more time talking about just different ways that we're seeing AI having an impact in society, and then ultimately, what does that mean for higher education? So, just some examples of things that we're seeing on the landscape out there. I mean, probably many of us on this, watching this video have had the misfortune of having some part of our body scanned. Our doctor called in a test or whatever, and that often looks like, we go to an appointment and there's a person that does the ultrasound, and then there's someone who reads the results of the ultrasound, and then we talk with our doctor. And now in many settings, there's multiple stages that are augmented with AI. For instance, AI is being used to clean up the quality of the scan to make it more palatable for human eyes. Um, so that's one thing that we're seeing is as a change in that process, to help that collaboration between AI and humans result in a better product or outcome. But also, AI will also provide a scan and do a bit of a read. Like certainly ask the human that will be reading the scan to read the whole thing, but pay special attention to what's inside this red box or what these arrows point to. And as a result of this human AI collaboration, in those settings where this is being used, 20% more cancers are being discovered than with the conventional non-AI assisted strategy. So that's one example. Another example is from my own experience with my primary care physician. I went to see my doctor recently, and previously the experience was always he would kind of roll in with a little laptop cart, and he would talk to me very earnestly, like he'd say, "Hey Eddie, how are Liam and Carter? How are the kids?" kind of thing. And then he would open up his laptop, and then he would ask me what brought me in, and then he would start typing. And so I would spend much of that time just watching him type, right? That kind of experience. Wait, we talk briefly, and then I watch him type. Well, recently I went to see him. Same experience. He rolls in. How are Liam and Carter? What brought you in today? But then he did a couple of keystrokes, and then he leaned back and folded his arms and said, "No, what brought you in today?" And so we're talking a bit. And about 3 minutes in, I gotta say, I started to feel kind of uncomfortable with all the eye contact. I literally waved my hands in front of my face and said, "Wait a second, something's very different here. What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I, I have a new software that I'm piloting. It's a generative AI tool. It's listening to our conversation." I wish he had told me it was listening to our conversation, but he said it's listening to our conversation. It's taking notes. He says, it's putting in a first draft of insurance codes that may be aligned with some of the things that's being said. And he said, to be honest, I know which insurance codes are going to get kicked back. So I always make changes to those insurance codes. We'll talk over the notes before it's entered into your record. But it was a very different experience. He and I, it was like having a conversation with an old friend, over coffee or something. We're making eye contact, we're smiling, we're nodding. And I was thinking on the way home that, wow, this is a very different experience. And it made me start thinking about all of the nonverbal communication that our primary care physicians have been missing, for possibly, years and years. The tagline for this particular technology is "See the patient, not the technology." And I've got to say, I felt very seen. It felt like an improvement to the quality of that experience by having so much, well, real human kind of connection. So beyond the world of healthcare, we're seeing it in certainly many other places. I mean, one good example of that is the legal world. There's a tool called CoCounsel that has a tagline, so you can do more of what AI can't. And it's a tool that will like review a contract and provide feedback on the contract, and then of course a lawyer would look at those details and discern what needs to be changed or not. But I was talking to a colleague at a large research institution who said that their legal department was now using CoCounsel to review contracts. And as a result, the time to completion of contracts had been diminished. That, instead of maybe taking the better part of a day to review a foundation contract or a contract from an IT company for, individual junior lawyer doing that work, it might take more like 90 minutes to complete that kind of work. Um, so I asked, well, what does that mean then for the work life of that individual, that junior lawyer? He said, well, we've kind of been pushing our junior lawyers to actually have more of a project management and an interaction sort of strategy associated with those that they're working with. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, like you review a foundation contract and you email it back to your contact at the foundation to get their feedback or sign off. And wait like an hour and then call them. Like literally use the old phone and say, "Hey, I sent that contract back to you. Have you had a chance to review it? You probably haven't had time yet, but can we schedule a time later today or tomorrow?" So in other words, just trying to facilitate movement forward to, complete this work. Um, as a result, they say that they're now, cutting, the better part of, a week to 2 weeks off of the contracting process, and they market themselves to the private sector world as saying, "Hey, if you wanted to collaborate with a research university, uh, we're the ones to come to because we've streamlined our processes." Though it made me think, if you don't have junior level lawyers doing junior level work for the better part of, let's say, a decade, how do we get senior level lawyers? So I think that this might be a problem that we're going to see in lots of different fields where as we allow AI or adopt AI to do certain kinds of tasks and to free us up to do other kinds of tasks, we might find that we have some interesting workforce challenges that begin to emerge. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the context of the professoriate as we go forward. But I think we're going to see some similar issues across lots of different fields as we allow AI to take on more and more of certain kinds of thinking and certain kinds of tasks. And just one more example of what we're seeing out in the world of work. I mean, probably many of us have had, I'll say it again, the misfortune of actually calling like a helpline for a company. I don't necessarily love that experience. I'm the one that always presses zero. I found that like you press zero 7 to 9 times, and then that pretty much will get you straight to a human being, rather than having to go through the tree of like, press one for X, press two for Y, that kind of thing. I guess as I think about it, I probably shouldn't use the name of a real company as I talk through this example. I should make up the name of a fake company. I'll call it AT&T. I don't really enjoy my experience of calling AT&T and T and trying to get whatever my issue might be resolved with billing or whatever. But in some contexts, there's AI that's being used by customer service representatives in multiple ways. There's different tools out there on the landscape, but some have AI within the headset for the customer service representative, and it listens in to the call and will provide guidance to the customer service representative. It might provide text that says, or a voice in the headset that says, "This customer sounds upset. Try to de-escalate, talk more slowly." Or, text will appear on the screen and it'll have a highlighted text that answers the question that was just posed by the customer who called in. As a result of this collaboration, just in time support for the customer service representative in these settings where such tools are being used, they're resolving more issues per hour. Customer sentiment's improving. There are fewer requests from those that called in to, angry requests like "let me talk to your manager" kind of thing. Um, but I think maybe what's most interesting in studies from these settings is that actually employee retention is improving. And I have a friend who used to work at a call center, nearly 2 decades ago. And he said it was kind of a grueling job where he worked. He said, if someone was calling, they typically weren't very happy. They were upset about something if they got you on the phone. So he said that, it was challenging and sometimes emotionally a little grueling. And I said, "Well, how did you get help?" And he said, "Well, they didn't like us to do someone had to explicitly say, 'Let me talk to your manager,' before you would escalate to a manager. In other words, try to solve it at your level before you move it forward." But he said every Friday at 4, the shift boss would kind of call everybody in and say, "Well, hey, it's been a long week. Anybody have any troubling cases or challenging cases this week?" And they would get feedback then. And he said, that was always helpful. But he also said it would have been much more helpful if I'd gotten that assistance back on Tuesday when I had that issue. And he says, also you get that advice on a Friday, and then 2 weeks later you run into a similar issue. It's not necessarily clear that you're going to remember exactly the advice that you got. And I think the reason we're seeing why there's this improvement in employee retention is exactly the just-in-time support, right? You're having an issue and you get some support from the AI that helps you resolve it. So we're seeing lots of different ways that AI can help within the world of work. Um, And I guess in some of my less cynical moments, and I promise I'll have some cynicism as we go forward, but in my less cynical moments, I think that AI has the potential to make us a little bit happier in the work that we do. And I mean that indeed also those within higher education, those that are faculty, staff, administrators, that AI has the potential to make us a bit happier. As an example, in my last semester teaching before joining AAC&U, I had a large number of requests from students to write letters of recommendation. I really value that work. I'm very happy to write that letter. If our curriculum and our humanity and our pedagogy have gotten students 99% of the way to that job or to that next step to graduate school, I'm more than happy to write that letter. But for me, it takes like an hour to write a letter, right? To do a good letter. But I asked for certain things. Before AI, I would say, "Can you send me your resume and the job description that you applied for, also your cover letter. Also, tell me three things you would like for me to highlight within this letter. And so then I would write to that. But I could take that same packet of information now with AI and ask AI to write a draft letter using these things, highlighting these three strengths. And then, of course, I read every word, right? I edit it. I think about voice and tone and what I really feel. And do I have examples myself? To be honest, I feel like the most powerful thing I've ever written in a letter of recommendation is the personal story. Like I remember when Carla was in my class and she led this sort of challenging group of students to complete this group project. You know, those kinds of personal stories I think are maybe the most impactful part of a letter of recommendation. So I would still write that. I read every word that came from the letter, make edits, but instead of the letter taking me an hour to write, maybe it only takes me, 15 minutes to write. So then the question might become, well, what do I do with that extra 30 hours that maybe I reclaimed in March and April, near the end of a semester? Do I reinvest it in my students? Do I focus on my research with that extra time? Do I invest it in myself? Do I go for a run in the afternoon rather than spend time in front of the computer? So I think we're going to see similar kinds of shifts, and that's a broader thing that I want to talk about as we kind of go forward here. But um, what are we really seeing from the world of work? I mean, there was a study at Stanford University that looked at the Federal Job Index, which has, north of 960 job descriptions within it. And this group of researchers concluded that every job, list of tasks in job descriptions in the Federal Job Index, all of those jobs, 100% of them had at least one task that AI could do better today. Now, that doesn't mean that AI is taking these jobs. It just means that it's going to become a component of these jobs. In fact, the whole notion of job loss, I think, is that concern is diminishing in some ways, but increasing in others. And I want to talk a bit about that. But um, I think we're going to see the presence of AI more and more in just about every walk of life, every kind of job. I mean, there was a report earlier this fall, and really you almost see these weekly these days, is something about the unemployment rate and how it's impacting various populations. We have heard that hiring for our recent college graduates has been soft. In other words, entry level positions, it's been softer. Um, some headlines will lay that right at the feet of AI. I think AI could be a variable in that. I'll talk more about that too. And there are some specific disciplines that do seem to be more exposed to AI than others, like computer engineering, design, so like programming and architecture are among those fields that are likely to be most affected and are being affected. But is AI responsible for the entirety of the softness of the job market? I tend to think not. My observations say, well, AI is a variable, but we've also had some, um, we had a change in leadership in the federal government in 2025, and there have been sort of a tariff strategy and other things that have been disruptors within our economy. So, that's not necessarily AI related at all. But AI is in the mix. Maybe tariffs are in the mix. Maybe uncertainty regarding changes in federal law and how it's employed. In fact, some employers are saying that where they are right now, it's not that they're necessarily cutting jobs, but that they're taking a sort of wait and see. Let's see how the economy levels off as there's a change in administration. Let's see if AI can really, reposition and take positions, or, maybe it's not. In fact, there was a survey of more than 1,000 C-suite leaders. It was published in Forbes. It was last week. I had to look at my watch to see where we are, but it was about a week ago, and more than 90% of leaders said they did not think that AI was going to be a job displacer. They actually feel like it's likely to create more jobs. So again, it's fluid, it's in flux. In fact, there's a few different people that I follow that I really respect, and that just within the last week, I've seen there being significant disagreement in their prognostications regarding what's likely to happen next. Uh, One person had noted. in a LinkedIn post and had some data to go with it. But they said, "Wow, we think that this past summer's hiring for college graduates was soft. Next year's going to be even worse." Um, and there could be a lot of reasons for that, but he was also pointing to AI. And then I've seen others that have suggested, no, we're going to see a little bit of a return to normal as we better understand what AI can and can't do in terms of job replacement. So a lot of really good minds are in disagreement regarding what's to happen, but there are certain trends that we do see from the world of work. And there's data points like the one currently on the screen and job reports and the like that give us some sense of insight. But about 2 years ago, so as AI was kind of unfolding within the world, Amazon Web Services did a large scale employer survey. And at that time, about 19 out of 20 said if they weren't already using AI in their work processes, that they had it on their roadmap that they were going to be using AI in the near future. So that's another indicator that, wow, a lot of different jobs, lots of different types of jobs are going to be touched by AI. At that time, employers were noting that they were already having difficulty finding people with AI skills to do the work that they were envisioning. Now, that's not other things that they valued in hiring processes have gone away. I mean, if you're going to hire an accountant, you need someone with accounting skills, right? And an accounting degree. That's not going away. And then we saw a shift 15 years ago or more where employers nationally had kind of shifted away from just tell me what your grade point average was and which institution you went to and what are some of the courses you took, but also can you provide me with evidence regarding your possession of key, what are sometimes referred to as durable skills? Like, can you prove that you're a critical thinker? Can you prove that you can write well or work well on teams? Those kinds of things. How do you build that into an application? Um, those things aren't going away. But there's a third bucket now, and it's that employers are indeed looking for AI related skills. And so employers say that they're having a hard time finding, well, that unicorn that has, yes, the degree skills, yes, the durable skills, and yes, also the AI related skills. A more recent survey since the Amazon survey was one from Microsoft. And in that survey, two-thirds of leaders said that they would not hire someone without AI skills. Of course, those in the C-suite often aren't the ones doing the hiring, right? There's the HR hiring manager, so there's maybe a different perspective there. But it's continuing to show maybe a trend that there is an expectation in the world of work that AI skills might be essential for just about every job and might suggest then that AI literacy or AI skills might be essential learning for those that are in college, that they should indeed leave college with some of those skills. So, what are we seeing from? We've been talking about employers. What are employees reporting? So, the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, they've repeated a survey for a couple of years, and they ask employees, like, are you using AI in the workplace? A lot of different fields and disciplines represented here. The two bars on the left are the aggregate of all of the disciplines kind of clustered together. 2 years ago, it was 1 in 3 employees were reporting that they were using generative AI in the workplace at least once a week. And then 1 year after that, so just a year ago, um, it went from 1 in 3 to 7 in 10. So that's a pretty big jump. Um, so you think about today, or maybe even projecting further whenever our seniors graduate from college in May of 2026. Would we estimate that, instead of 7 in 10, maybe it's 8 in 10 or 4 out of 5 of us new college graduates are expected to use generative AI in the workplace? Might even be higher than that, maybe instead of 8 in 10, maybe it's inching up to 8.5, 85% or even north of that. Um, there was also a survey last summer that specifically asked new college graduates, about their struggles in the workplace. And at that time, half noted that, wow, college did not prepare me to use AI as expected in the world of work. Also, about 7 in 10 expressed frustration that I just got my college degree and now I need more training on new tech to be able to do an entry level job. And along those same lines, they expressed frustration that college should have taught me this. This should have been integrated into college courses and within the college curriculum. Of course, that's much easier said than done. If anyone on this call or watching the video has ever been a part of a gen ed reform effort on a campus, it's it's not something that we do quickly. I think we in higher ed do curriculum reform really well. We don't do curriculum reform fast really well. And there's lots of good reasons for that. You want to get it right. If you do a gen ed reform, you're not going to do that every other semester. You want to get it right, you want to get it in place, and then you want to write it for a few years and then reflect on what the needs might be, how they may have changed, and what you might want to engage in a revision process yet again. So it's one thing that, for AI to be out for a couple of years and higher ed hasn't really caught up yet. But there's increasing pressures that maybe higher ed needs to figure out how to address this. I think if we go, 5 years from the launch of generative AI and we haven't figured out how to address this within our courses and curriculum, that's probably problematic as we see more and more students maybe dissatisfied with their the outcomes associated with their degree in college because they don't feel like they're ready to do the work that's now required of them. So that's something that's a pressure on higher ed. In fact, there was a survey from this past summer. I think it was fielded in the early part of July 2025. Um, Half of college students said in that survey that AI is the most important thing that they're going to learn in college. I got to tell you, I tend to disagree with that. I think there's a lot more important things that college students are going to learn while they're in college. Critical thinking writ large as a learning outcome is maybe an essential skill across all fields and disciplines that is near the top of the most important things. But I guess the question might become, why do students believe this? Why do the majority of students think this is the most important thing I'm going to learn in college? I was actually on a college campus recently talking to a fairly large group of college students, all gen ed students, and I asked the question regarding how many of you are concerned, since they're early in their academic college career. I said, how many of you are concerned that you may have selected a major that may be less relevant or unemployable as a result of AI by the time you graduate? And it was an eyeball of a large crowd, but I think it's maybe 80% of the hands went up and said that, essentially responding yeah to that concern. Like and so like why would students have this concern? And certainly it's the hype cycle right now, right? I mean, there's so much hype regarding AI and concerns about job loss and career loss and all of those kinds of things. So it's not necessarily misplaced, but we need to recognize that the students in front of us have this expectation and either adjust that expectation or think about how do we meet the expectation if students think the reason why they're there in front of us is because this is one of the things that they think is maybe the most important reason why they're in college to garner those skills. So how do we either respond and provide them with what they say they need or adjust their expectations? But this is sort of the broader expectation between employers and employees and then future employees, those that are our current college students. So back in the Amazon Web Services study a couple of years ago, those employers were also asked, what do you need to possess to be able to use AI well? Like, what are those discrete skills? I got to say, I was thrilled to see this list out of the mouths of employers because these are things that we value in higher ed as well. The number one thing that employers felt was needed to use AI well, you needed to be a critical thinker. You needed to be able to be a problem solver. And again, if you look at our gen ed curriculum across all of higher ed, critical thinking is often a learning outcome. Critical thinking and written communication are probably the top two learning outcomes within general education writ large. But creative thinking, technical skills, ethics was really high on that list. So, I think what we value in higher ed, employers value as well. And then there's this sort of synergy that, like, well, to use AI well, you really need to have those durable skills to be able to be a good user of AI. So we're often asked, well, what do you actually teach within your class? Like if we are seeing AI literacy emerge as maybe essential learning for college students, not that everyone is teaching AI or using AI on a college campus, but maybe we're at the point where someone should. It belongs somewhere in the curriculum. And just like we would with any new learning outcome within our major or from an accreditor, we would do a bit of a curriculum map. And it's like, okay, well, is anyone already teaching AI literacy? Might this be where this particular learning outcome resides within our larger curriculum? Okay, well, then whoever's teaching that course that has this learning outcome, that's where, you know, AI literacy will be taught, and therefore that's the faculty that need to know how to use AI well. But then there'll be plenty of other places where AI literacy is not being taught. So, anyways, it's a bit of a curriculum mapping exercise that we're now engaging in across higher education to understand, I guess, first, do faculty feel that graduates of our institution, with our mission, our history, our identity, is AI literacy a learning outcome that we want to provide our students with? And if the answer is yes, then it's the curriculum mapping kind of exercise. But then once a decision is made about AI literacy, or if someone wants to teach AI literacy, the question might be, well, what is AI literacy? What do we teach? And in truth, I think there's probably two boxes of sub dimensions associated with this broader concept of AI literacy. There's a set of skills that you'd really like your students to possess before they ever use AI in the first place. So, you know, what does that look like? Well, first off, we would hope our students would have a mindset that AI doesn't do the work for them, but rather AI does the work with them. So, engendering that mindset, also some technical skills like when to use one tool versus another. And then there's concerns about ethics, or just, is it a good idea to use AI in that way? Like, is it a good idea to take the results of a medical test, maybe that you get returned back to you in my chart, and copy and paste that into an AI and ask it for a layman's understanding of these complex medical results of that ultrasound? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Um, Probably pros and cons list for that particular practice. So helping our students sort of understand the nuances of using AI. And then, of course, there's this notion of prompt engineering. But then once, students sort of have these skills, they're ready to hit that first prompt across the tennis net to AI. And then there's a completely different set of skills that's required. There's this notion of reviewing and evaluating AI content to make sure that it's accurate and that doesn't contain bias. And of course, to handle the accuracy question, you have to have some domain knowledge. And to be honest, AI is a pretty good tool for faculty. We all have domain expertise. We're experts in our field. So if we ask AI for something and it provides us with a result, we have tacit knowledge we can draw on that can help us discern whether or not we should be concerned about the quality of the output. Students don't have that. AI is a horrible tool for students to be using because they don't have that foundation, that well of declarative knowledge within most fields and disciplines that they can then draw on. So we need to teach our students. All of the outcomes associated with the majors are just as important as they ever were, if not more so. But then in addition to that, we're seeing that some writing programs around the nation are including a couple of weeks of instruction in that writing sequence that actually focuses on editing content, not just writing, but also editorial skills. So that's an additional component of AI literacy. And then being able to iterate with AI, and you ask it for something and then to kind of go back and forth with it to refine a possible output. But I tell students, as well as faculty, really, that if you don't see your fingerprints on every line of code, every sentence in a final product that you've collected from generative AI, then you're probably not using AI well. You need to ensure that you are indeed a collaborating partner with AI, and that also you're making all of the executive decisions. So ultimately, I think we have a new tension that's emerged in higher education. And all institutions are struggling with this right now. This notion of, well, I would imagine that regardless of institution type, everyone on this call would agree that at least part of the purpose of higher education is to prepare students for life beyond graduation, which certainly would include the world of work as well as lifelong learning and happiness in life and everything else that college does. College has multiple purposes, but certainly one of them is associated with the world of work. And if you follow the line of logic from the world of work is evolving and changing, and it may be seen as essential learning, and most employers are expecting students to be able to work with AI. That seems like an argument for why maybe higher ed, most institutions are somewhat compelled to figure out how to address training students, teaching students how to use AI well and ethically. But there are other logic paths that lead us to a different conclusion, such as my oh no moment at the beginning of this presentation. Like, why would we want to teach our students to use a tool that could be used as basically a power tool for cheating? So why would we want to make them be, exceptional users of a tool that could be used for cheating or further could diminish their learning? Like, for instance, if you gave me a writing assignment and I ask AI to provide me with a detailed outline of how to respond to your writing prompt, and then I write every word. So, is that cheating? Yes or no? Well, that's debatable, I guess. But the question then might be, is learning negatively impacted? And most certainly. I mean, I wouldn't be struggling with what goes in the paper, what doesn't go in the paper, what the order of ideas should be. Basically we're just doing a bunch of little micro writing assignments. This is another argument for why we might want to keep this out of the classroom. But regardless, this is a tension that we're seeing most institutions and really most disciplines are struggling with. Like, how do we prepare students around concerns about needs for AI literacy skills? So the one question is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I guess I'm going to take a stance at the moment that's kind of agnostic. It's more of an observation that this is what's happening and why it's happening. That there's this interjection into higher ed right now where there's a debate regarding how do we address AI? Do we keep it out of the courses or does it become a part of our curriculum and where within the curriculum? We have an institute on AI pedagogy and the curriculum at AACNU. This current term here this is being recorded in November of 2025. We have 191 teams from college campuses from around the country and beyond that are engaging in that struggle. That's a large number of campuses. Last year, our first was the first year we did that. We had 129 campuses. So we've seen more than 10% of higher ed work with us in just the last year at AAC&U on developing a plan and then enacting that plan regarding AI and teaching and learning and academic integrity and the curriculum. Um, so whether this is good or bad, it's something that's happening right now. But there's a downstream concern. I mean, this is certainly a grand challenge that touches most classes, but there's a downstream concern. So number one, I mentioned this institute, and in their applications, each institute had to list their goals for participating within the institute. And the top reason why a campus was participating with us, and they have to send a team. It's a team of five or more focused on some collective agreed upon goals, putting together an action plan and then enacting that action plan. The number one reason why teams were there was about interjecting AI at appropriate points in the curriculum and also building student AI literacy. So that's why so much focus that's what they're focusing on with so many teams being a part of the institute. Also, issues around governance and policies and academic integrity, also rolling out AI technologies, and also accelerating faculty development. So there's a lot of focus and energy on ultimately changing faculty practice, improving skills around AI, but also, I mean, if you're going to change the curriculum and you're teaching AI literacy, all of that happens with faculty in the classroom. That's not something that happens, you know, around our curriculum. It's within the curriculum. So again, that's, faculty are stewards of the curriculum. So the focus is really on faculty, even if you're just talking about integrating AI at appropriate points in the curriculum. But this is a breakdown of those goals. But if you talk to faculty, what are they concerned about? And we did a brief snap survey. Jose and I, my co-author, we did a webinar together for faculty across higher ed, and it was basically, teaching with AI. How do you do it? And we asked them, what's their number one concern? Um, well, it's academic integrity concerns, but also the loss of student critical thinking and learning skills. And there's other notions here, but I want to suggest that there's a concern, as is suggested by the title of this session, that's not on this list that should be. Not that it's maybe above number one and number two, but I might put it at number three, tied for number three, possibly. And it's really related to not the curriculum, but how we faculty might leverage AI for the tasks of teaching. I mean, if you look at the learning management system companies and the various tools that are out there, and if you kind of compare them to the tasks associated with teaching a class, if you're teaching a class, you put together a syllabus and the class schedule, and then you might build out things in the learning management system, and then you've got assignments that you write and build, and then there's lectures that you would put together. Um, all the way through, teaching in class activities, all the way through grading. Well, that's a number of different ways that we faculty might leverage AI in service to improving the quality of instruction, but it might also save us some time. So, that's a little bit of a disruptor, right? I mean, if we think about some examples of how AI really has some possibilities for teaching, I mean, at AAC&U, we have rubrics, part of something that we call the value system, valid assessment of learning in undergraduate education. So you can download these for free. They're open educational resources at aacu.org/value. But kind of like all of the gen ed learning outcomes that you might find, we brought together faculty to define what are these learning outcomes from lots of different disciplines and institution types. So we sort of have like a broad generalized definition of these 16 learning outcomes: critical thinking, information literacy, written communication, teamwork, on down the line. Again, these are all freely available online. Um, what does a value rubric look like? It's just 2 pages, and the front page is just kind of a description, but page two is the actual rubric with a breakdown of the subdimensions that are indeed the learning outcome. So, like if you're talking critical thinking, what are the pieces of critical thinking that you would actually teach from one class to the next? So, like working with evidence and thinking about context and just simply explaining issues, those are among those outcomes. But because these are open educational resources widely available online, you can use AI to actually ask AI to create assignments that specifically target a learning outcome. So, just as one example of a prompt, you know, analyze typical political science writing assignments and adapt or create 5 new assignments that specifically ask students to engage in critical thinking as defined by AAC&U's value rubric for critical thinking. So as a result of that, you can see on the screen like a summary analysis of what do typical political science writing assignments look like. And then after that summary, there's 5 different writing assignments that align perfectly with the value rubric. So if you were going to grade or score student work for programmatic assessment using our value rubric system, this can make sure that you're asking your students to actually show their critical thinking skills in an assignment, so that if you're assessing for critical thinking, well, the assignment was designed to do that work, to show what indeed students can do. So, you could choose any learning outcome that you might be interested in. So think about the courses you teach, one of these 16, and then change that prompt to, create a global learning assignment as defined by AAC&U's value rubric for global learning. So really powerful ways that we could leverage AI. But I guess when you look at this tasks of teaching list, and I see colleagues on every college campus that are already figuring out how to use AI for many of these things. And possibly the one that is maybe most contentious is the notion of grading. well, what if we leveraged AI for grading? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And, that's where a lot of our time goes, right? And we've seen a lot of different companies come out with tools to do various things. I think that I was waiting for the learning management system world to kind of get there, and indeed, Canvas, made by Instructure. I think it was August they announced of this year that they have a tool that can grade just about anything, and the other learning management systems are certainly to follow suit. Um, so, is it back sort of like, is it a good idea for us to be using AI for grading? And there's certainly mixed feelings about that. However, tools exist and faculty are now using them, often using them. Um, but then the core question then is, what does it mean to the profession if AI is leveraged for key tasks of teaching? So if let's say you're teaching a 3-in-3 load, and if you are using it for grading and for putting together a good assignments and helping with lecture development and building PowerPoint slide decks, I mean, hopefully you're doing that for two reasons. One is that it's going to save you some time, and number two, maybe it will make the quality output, you collaborating with AI to develop an assignment or to engage in the grading processes, save you time, but also do better work. Um, but ultimately, I think that there's a couple of different scenarios that might result from this. Um, One scenario is that some key institutional pressures may be diminished. So what I mean by that, I mean as I travel around and talking about teaching with AI, I'm often asked to meet with university leaders or system level leaders. And I've done presentations for groups of presidents and the like. And as I talk about opportunities associated with AI, I've heard this question multiple times. Um, Wait a second. If AI can do the grading and help with all these other things, does this mean that we can finally fire all the adjuncts and increase class size? Literally had that question, and I've had variants of that question asked of me. Well, that's one perspective, isn't it? That, if it doesn't take you as long to grade, and if maybe one of the pushback arguments has been, well, for my writing class, I can't have more than 25 students in a section because if I'm teaching four sections, that's 100 papers I have to grade every time students turn in something. So you can't increase my class size anymore because it'd be impossible to grade. So some leaders are seeing AI as a solution to the class size conundrum. Um, so my response is, well, that's one sort of dystopian view is that, we decrease the number of faculty and increase class sizes. A colleague of mine years ago used to say about large classes, stack them deep and teach them cheap. And so certainly there are challenges for higher ed right now. There's fiscal challenges, there's enrollment challenges, and so universities are trying to figure out how to resolve those challenges. And AI is being seen as a possible solution. What does this mean to the professoriate if this shift rapidly occurs? So bookmark that notion. Then the second scenario is, what if instead of increasing class size, we focus on what we know about student learning and student success? Like what leads a student to stay in college or to what improves learning? And to be honest, that research question has been answered. Like, what are great predictors of student learning and student success? Um, is it high school grade point average? Pretty good predictor. How about SAT or ACT scores? Less of a good predictor. What we know is that is the greatest indicator of whether or not student learning or student success, and this is also true in K-12 as well as higher ed. The greatest predictor, it's you, the quality of the instructor. So the the big promise then for AI may be not increasing class size, but what if we save several hours each week associated with some of those tasks of teaching? And what if we take those hours and realize these are intended for instruction? These are instructional hours. What if we rethought how to engage our students, develop a new signature pedagogy that is a is a pedagogy of engagement and mentorship, and probably engagement in outside of class opportunities as well. I think if I ask everyone on this call or watching this video, what was the most impactful thing that ever happened to you when you were an undergraduate? In terms of teaching and learning, I should say. I don't think anyone would say, wow, there was this PowerPoint on a Tuesday I'll never forget. It's more likely that someone pulled you aside and made you feel like you belonged in college or made a personal connection with you. And that is what still stays with you as, why you're in college, that kind of human impact, something that AI is not going to replace, that kind of mentorship and caring and all of those things that maybe as what I see is the great promise that we have more capacity to actually be with our students and to teach our students and mentor our students, different ways. So I guess these are two different views, right? There's one view that is larger class sizes and we solve some of the fiscal challenges within our institution versus we lean into what we know about how students learn and develop a new signature pedagogy that's one of engagement and mentorship and teaching. Um, I imagine from one institution to the next, we're going to see variants of that somewhere in the gray space between these two ends. My sort of utopian view of teaching and learning being Socratic and we're with our students and all of that versus large class sizes and we're all sort of forced to use AI because we can't keep up without using tools of automation. It's going to be somewhere in between that. But I guess ultimately, this is why I think there's a need for a call to action at this moment, especially for higher education faculty, is that AI definitely has the potential to disrupt what faculty labor looks like. Less time for what we've traditionally done is required as a result of broader adoption of AI. And without a doubt, for better or worse, most higher ed institutions are grappling with an AI conundrum. Like, should we have this in our curriculum? Okay, where in our curriculum? How do we gin up teaching and learning practices associated with preparing students to have AI literacy? We need to teach faculty how to use these as well. So faculty development is a big thing. There's all of this energy right now, but then there are these other sort of companion concerns. I mean, the realities. AI has the potential to disrupt faculty labor. There is enormous venture capital supporting AI development right now. I mean, you hear a lot about the AI bubble, and it's like the bubble is there's a lot of money going here, and is it actually returning rewards or not? But there's enormous VC supporting AI development specifically for higher ed, with a focus on higher ed as well as K-12. But yeah, the ASU plus GSV event is a good exemplar of that. 7,000 people who are ed tech folks and venture capitalists gathering once a year to think about what to invest in going forward. Without a doubt, leaders are already on college campuses and state systems are examining the implications of what AI can potentially do in terms of faculty labor as well as staff labor and everything else. Not that this is about how do we replace faculty. I don't really hear that conversation. I more see how does this change the way that we're doing things on campus with the players that we have on the field at the moment. What I'm also seeing is this conversation around faculty labor being disrupted. I don't really see faculty having this conversation yet on campuses. And I feel like this is the moment to join this conversation before decisions are made I guess the goalposts are full of a lot of sports metaphors today. I don't know why, but um, before before things begin to change and decisions are made that may change the professoriate in ways that faculty might not prefer. So I guess ultimately, in terms of a call to action, these are some of the action items associated with it. Um, One is, I think, not that we already don't have enough to do on our plates, but I think all of us, need to stay abreast of what AI can do in the context of our courses and within our discipline. So in other words, what are the implications? How is AI marching forward and being adopted and all of those kinds of we need to create space to continue to stay aware of what's going on. And if you don't have the capacity to do that, find someone on your campus that is doing this work or someone in your field. You've got a colleague at another college and they're the one that always leans into being the early adopter of stuff. Hey, every conference you go to, make sure you have dinner with them. Just try to stay um, on top of things. Something else, reach out and ask campus leaders in your context how they believe AI will impact faculty in the future and see if you can discern what is being explored or planned currently. And then also, and this is something I would suggest like as an action item this in the next month. In key contexts such as your next department meeting or faculty senate meetings or other such places, start discussions about how AI may reshape faculty roles and how you want it to look. Like what will that outcome look like? Again, if faculty aren't part of this conversation, you're kind of leaving it to state leaders or leaders on campus. Not that they won't make the right decisions or try to make the right decisions, but it's certainly not a shared governance approach regarding what the future of your career might look like. We need to lean into these conversations and raise our hand at every department meeting or every faculty senate and say, hey, this has the potential. How is this disrupting things? What are people talking about at the Board of Visitors meeting, or what have you heard the president say anything about, how these shifts might occur? I think also it's depending on your orientation, you may want to emphasize student learning and student success as foundational purposes of the instructional mission on your campus. And then given that orientation, then we should be driven by specifically what we know about teaching and learning. Um, I also encourage you to be as active as possible in the decisions that are being made on your campus, and then urge colleagues to begin to develop a vision for how the role of professor could or should evolve and what must be preserved. Because I think what I'm seeing, I guess what I'm most concerned about is that if faculty aren't a part of this conversation, this evolution is going to happen anyways, and they won't have a voice in what that evolution is going to look like. So I encourage you, maybe as the first step, that third bullet, in key context at the department meeting, say, hey, I've heard about this. I realize it has these implications. What does this mean for our department or for our campus? What's the dean? You ask your department chair, what's the dean talking about? If you are in touch with the dean, ask what the provost is talking about. But discern where those conversations are and then ask, how can faculty be a part of that conversation regarding the future of our careers? Okay. So that's the end of what I had prepared for you. So I'm going to pull open the Q&A window, and I see that there's some questions that have been sent to me as well. Nothing in the Q&A, but I see a question from Mary. Question: Is AI possibly just another bibliographic source in which students review content, recognize limits, question nuances, iterate with their own views or other content? In other words, contribute their ideas. Isn't that the real work of a liberal arts classroom and assignment? Indeed. I think as we think about teaching with AI or encouraging students to use AI or discouraging the use of AI, there's the notion that it's really a tool and it's neither good nor bad, but how you use it or assign it makes it so, whether it's good or bad. So in other words, this notion of like when done well. And I do not believe that AI and its existence is counter to a liberal arts education. In fact, I was quoted in, it may have been a Forbes article, or maybe it was the Chronicle, that the humanities now are maybe more important than they've ever been, given the flood of misinformation that's out there and the lack of emotional intelligence that's sometimes represented by uh, content that's produced by AI. There's lots of different things you can kind of talk about there, but yeah, I think that a liberal arts education is, maybe more important than it's ever been, and there's ways to use AI really well, or ways that might undermine student achievement of the learning outcomes that we might have for them. I mean, I think we're in a unique moment with AI in that this might be the first time that we've had a learning outcome within our curriculum that is at war with our other learning outcomes. So, for instance, we would never say, oh gosh, we can't teach written communication because that's going to mess up the students' critical thinking. We can't be teaching those two together. They would actually amplify one another. Those 16 value rubrics for those 16 learning outcomes, they all work in harmony and amplify one another. But AI literacy as a learning outcome has the potential to diminish achievement of those other learning outcomes, whether they're liberal arts learning outcomes or other learning outcomes. So there is a pedagogy of practice, and I think this is what Jose, my co-author, and I have really focused on was like how do you use AI in ways that are actually positive to the teaching and learning process. Another question that's been shared is employers are concerned with learning adaptability, the ability to keep learning as things change and relearning as a topic. How can that be addressed in AI infused curriculum? Well, I mean, one of the goals of most higher education institutions is this notion of engendering lifelong learning. I mean, that our students leave the institution and they know how to continue to learn and they have an interest in continuing to kind of learn and grow. And indeed, AI has the potential to diminish that, this whole notion of cognitive offloading. But again, I think it comes back to when done well, how might we structure things to ensure that things that we value aren't diminished as a result of using AI? And often what we might see as best practice in one field or one discipline is seen as sort of counter to best practice in another. We actually see this in like a note-taking app that I was just describing at the beginning about primary care physicians, how it's being used and it actually is making sort of the experience more humane, where some are perceiving note-taking apps for nurses on their rounds as being counterproductive to the value of the work that they're doing because they're not paying as much attention to each client because note-taking is occurring by the technology, so they don't have to stay as engaged as much. So, nursing and physicians, very similar, close fields, but the practice around AI is seen as very different. So ultimately, I think we're seeing a lot of different practices emerging, and from one discipline to the next. And what we're also seeing is that a lot of the national associations for specific fields are providing statements or guidance. Like the MLA had a statement on educational technology and agentic AI and what the concerns are there. And there's a public health association that's also providing guidance. They actually have a chat bot where you can have questions regarding how to engage with an AI chat bot regarding best practices within that field and curriculum. So there's a lot of different strategies that are emerging, and fortunately, we're at sort of this moment where we're beginning to see that the national associations for different disciplines and fields are stepping forward with guidance that is providing some clarity regarding how to accomplish exactly what the question was sort of at the heart of. Another question. I get concerned that faculty may become embroiled in the fears of AI and not the opportunity. Forward-thinking faculty may want to propose how to convert time freed by AI into signature pedagogy, high-impact practices, and value outcomes. That's the ideal, right? That if you're at an institution where you teach a 4-and-4 load, which roughly represents a 40-hour a week job, varies from one week to the next, and often far more than that. But just let's, for the sake of argument, let's say it's 40 hours a week. If AI can be leveraged to replace, say, 15 hours a week, I think there's a maybe an ethical imperative for faculty to not just adopt those 15 hours as, hey, I've innovated my teaching and I've got 15 extra hours, and so that's just 15. I get 15 extra hours each week that I don't have to apply to teaching. I think we need to say we know that the teaching enterprise with this teaching load takes this many hours. If you're teaching a 2-and-2 load, whatever that has historically been equivalent to, if it's 20 hours a week great. If you're teaching 4 and 4, it's 40 hours a week or whatever it might be. But if you leverage AI in ways that improve the teaching and learning process for you, improves learning outcomes for your students, and saves you time, that's kind of like the holy trinity maybe of what AI could do within the classroom. But then you find that it saves, let's say 15 hours a week, which that might be aspirational to save that many hours, but let's say that it did. I think that the ethical imperative of the profession is that we figure out how to then take those hours and then reinvest it into teaching. Like, okay, now that I'm more available, and without a doubt, the most valuable thing in any class is you. It's you, your time, your expertise, your mentorship, your humanity. That's the most valuable thing in any class. I mean, the classroom space is great, having computers, having the right textbooks, whatever, all those are great. It's the faculty member that is the course. It's their vision, their expertise. So if you have 15 extra hours and you don't have to do these other tasks, and your class is only going to be 3 hours a week or whatever, what do you do with those 15 hours that could actually positively impact student learning or the student's relationship with the institution or larger success metrics? You know, maybe it's like, hey, you know what? I have to eat every day. And every day on Wednesday, I'm going to be in the dining hall at that really big table with 12 seats. And I'm going to be there from 12 to 2. I'm going to take a nice long lunch. Come and talk to me about my career, or come and talk to me about basketball or surfing, or what you hope to do with your career, or who I might connect you with within the industry or within the next graduate school that you're interested in. Just be available and have your students develop those relationships and get to know you and be able to mine you for information. I mean, I think we all as undergraduates had experiences where we took classes and we maybe never interacted with the professor, even in a small section. We maybe got called on once or twice, but we never had an interaction. We never learned from their experience. We never understood why they were a professor. I mean, we all liked college so much, we never left. Why is that? Do we share that? Like why we love educational psychology or philosophy or religion or physics or whatever, engineering? Why are we still here and communicating that, engendering that passion and answering their questions? That's how a student becomes connected. And also, when it comes time to write that letter of recommendation, you might actually know the student. So there's lots of real opportunity, and I think that's the big question. I don't have an example that's going to work for everyone across every discipline. But if you are able to have some additional time, how do you reinvest that instructional time in service to your students? So I guess this is probably the last question looking at the time, but the question is how might AI help or hurt reinvestment in the humanities? Well, I think that there are things that AI does really well, and there are things that AI maybe doesn't do as well. I mean, AI does tend to have some level of emotional intelligence. It can produce drafts of things, but you think about what are the learning outcomes that are typically associated with the humanities, and does AI replace the need for those as much in the real world? I mean, beyond the world of work, like just in life, or does AI actually mean that we need to possess greater competency with learning outcomes associated with the humanities? In other words, to be able to use AI well to navigate the ethical implications or the moral implications of AI, to think about the environment, to think about what are some of the cybersecurity concerns, and then what does that ultimately mean for humanity? All of those questions that maybe a humanities education would better prepare us to be able to answer in an array of different contexts. I mean, ultimately, I think that AI magnifies the need for us to be able to achieve all of the learning outcomes, our students to achieve all of the learning outcomes within the curriculum. In other words, I don't think that AI means, well, you take a look at the gen ed curriculum and we can slash these 9 hours because, students are never going to need to write again. No, actually, there's a need for a more sophisticated set of writing skills now because you're not just writing, but you actually are going to be reviewing and editing a lot of content and evaluating for bias and accuracy is actually at the top of Bloom's taxonomy of learning outcomes. Evaluation is right near the top. In other words, it's a sophisticated higher order learning outcome. So actually, yeah, the outcomes associated with humanities are now maybe more important than they were prior to the broad launch of generative AI back in November of 2022. Well, I see that we're right at time. Thanks again for the opportunity to be able to be a part of this event. Let's see if I've got any additional notes here. Yes, Alt Liberal Arts invites you to join us for future webinars and events. You can register at altliberalarts.org. All offerings are free of charge, and you can also view past webinars, including this one, at Alt Liberal Arts YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.